Hi, everybody. Dr. Morton here. I wanted to have a quick discussion about the difference between capacity and capability, and then touch briefly on sustainability. And then in a few minutes, I'm also going to talk about matching funds to provide a little clarity. A few questions came up this week in Module 2, so I wanted to take a stab at providing a little clarification. So in discussion one, we talked a little bit about capacity, organizational capacity, capacity building, and capability. So when you think about capacity or even just organizational capacity, what you're talking about is having the systems, the resources, the processes in place to effectively implement a grant. And I'm sorry if you hear my cat in the background meowing. She's unhappy. My apologies. So capacity is specific to your infrastructure, and it is the ability for your organization as a whole to implement the grant. In that, for instance, last year I wrote a grant for a division within my organization, and it had a lot of components in it. Like, we needed to hire staff, we needed to obtain data sharing and memorandum of understanding agreements. We needed to have contracts with specific businesses to improve our case management system. We had to develop a research plan because this grant had a strong research element in it, and it was going to, through the research, we hoped we were going to be able to improve practice and improve lives. So in order for the organization to have the capacity to implement that grant effectively, we needed to have a number of things in place. We needed to have somebody with experience managing grants. Hello, that would be me. We needed to have finance systems in place for invoicing and reporting and managing contracts and purchases. We needed to have someone who knew about data sharing agreements and memorandum of understanding. We needed to have HR processes in place to hire temporary grant staff. So luckily, my organization has all of those things in place, and they have tons and tons of experience managing grants, especially within my specific division. We have a lot of experience managing discretionary grants. So we have the capacity in the organization. The organization has the infrastructure needed to be successful in implementing and supporting a grant project. This particular grant was a little bit larger than our normal discretionary grants, so the budget was kind of complex. We had a lot of elements. It was bringing in about $1.5 million into the agency over a 3-year period. And, that sounds like a lot, but in a large state agency, it's really not very much. But still, it was complex, and our organization had to have the capacity to implement that. So let's talk a little bit about capability. So capability is kind of like your resume for being able to be an expert in the particular grant topic. Capability is usually specific to like a specific task or activity, or you're the expert in a particular program or service provided to clients. So that's capability, and those are your qualification. That is your history with this particular project or service, or whatever your project is. That's how you demonstrate that you're able to do that, because you have experience doing these tasks and you successfully completed these types of programs in the past. So that's what capability is. So hopefully that clarified the difference between capacity, which is specific to the infrastructure you have in place in your organization, and capability. Capability is specific to the task. Capacity is the systems and infrastructure and resources your organization has to be effective in implementation. So what is a capacity building grant? It's for those organizations that have the capability, they have the experience, they know how to treat the clients, they understand the practice, but they don't have necessarily the capacity to implement grants because they don't have anyone with experience with contracts. They don't have anybody experienced with budgeting. Those capacity building grants help that organization with the expertise in a specific task get ready to manage a grant effectively. Then there's one other thing I want to talk about, and that's sustainability. So usually, and especially in discretionary grants, the funding organization is going to want to know, how are you going to sustain this program after the grant is over? So sustainability is just how you're going to tell the funder that, yeah, these are our plans to sustain this program. If the program perhaps is successful, you're going to implement it across your organization. Or if it's successful, you're going to hire more staff so that you can implement this practice in the broader community. So that's sustainability, and you need to usually have that clearly stated in your grant narrative, your proposal that you're writing, that you're going to submit to your funder. So let's go on to topic 2 for this video and talk about some budgeting considerations. And the coming module, module 3, we're going to talk about budgets. And we've already had some things come up like matching costs. And so some funders will give you a portion of the cost of the grant, or excuse me, the portion of the cost of the program that you are wanting to implement, but you have to cover some remaining costs. So a lot of times with discretionary grants, the federal agency will offer 75% of the money to cover the cost of the grant project. And then the agency has to come up with the remaining 25%. So in my agency, we will not do in-kind matching. And in-kind matching is just where the the grantee covers certain costs, like a certain percentage of the costs, and that can include salaries or fringe or travel or the cost of equipment or supplies. Now, within my agency, you have to have a cash match. If I applied for a grant that covered 75% of the cost of the project, then my agency has to have cash set aside to cover that remaining 25% of the project. So that's something to keep in mind. Consider that closely, because coming up with 25% of a $2 million budget can be very difficult for a smaller organization. Let's see, in kind match, we talked about that. That could be your organization is responsible for a portion of grant costs. So let's talk about a couple of other kinds of grants. Let's talk about reimbursement grants or drawdown grants. So a reimbursement grant is when the grantee covers expenses, like they expend money prior to being paid by the grantor. So in Oklahoma, we have something called TSET grants, and it's TSET grants are associated with tobacco cessation programs generally. And so TSET is a reimbursement grant. And a lot of county health departments in Oklahoma have TSET grants. And so they are awarded the grant, and then they go to work and they have to pay the salary of the staff that are supporting the grant. They have to cover maybe the cost of advertising or supplies or any special equipments needed through the grant project. So they expend that money first, and then they invoice the grant for reimbursement. And that can become problematic, especially like in Oklahoma in a small rural county health department. They're supported by ad valorem or property taxes. And in rural Oklahoma, sometimes there's not a lot of property tax coming in. So if you're expending salaries and you're paying for expensive advertising, that can put a strain on your budget. So you need to really carefully consider those types of things when you're preparing your budget. Also in Oklahoma, there's another thing that we have to consider, and that is that we have lots of tribal land within our counties, and that impacts the ad valorem taxes that are collected, because tribal governments, if the land is tribal owned, they don't pay property tax on that land. They're a sovereign nation. So when you're talking about these things, you need to consider all of the variables when you're looking at what the costs are going to be and how you're going to be able to draw down the money. Some, like a drawdown grant, you just draw down cash from the grant and you have that money available to spend, but not every grant is designed that way. In fact, I'm writing a grant now, and if we are awarded, we will just be given the money, the total that we're going to get for the project up front, and we'll spend it. But we still have to report to the feds our financial reports. We have to tell them progress we're making. Those are all part of the grant process. So I hope this helped a little. Let me know if you have questions. Thanks. Bye.